Welcome to What the Theory with Joel. My name is Joel, and today we're starting a new series on existentialism, and we're going to start with the grandfather of existentialism, some old white guy called Soren Kierkegaard. And I think I'll start with this quote that for me captures the essence of what we're going to be talking about. The biggest danger, that of losing oneself, can pass off in the world as quietly as if it were nothing. Every other loss, an arm, a leg, $5, a wife, is bound to be noticed. So this, I guess, mode of thought is something that first attracted me to philosophy and this kind of thinking because it's a question of not understanding more about abstract ideas, not knowing a lot about absolute spirit, or understanding about the modalities of creating oneself in a world. It's moving beyond knowledge about what is and how the world operates, which is mostly science. It's moving into understanding what you should do as an individual. And if I'm to think about the idea of existentialism and the problem that it has, it can sound a bit dramatic. It can sound like guys are just pontificating over things that you don't really need to pontificate over. I mean, every human being is born into a certain culture, you receive instruction, and you know what you're supposed to do as a human being, and that's pretty much it. The question at the heart of this, the problem, I suppose, of existentialism is that life is not really a problem that has to be solved. It's a reality that has to be experienced. And in experiencing life, it's very easy to get lost in the crowd. To live according to the dictates of what you find present. If you think about me, for instance, I was born in the 1980s. I know I don't look that old, but I'm actually quite old. So I was born in the 80s. I live a certain way. My sister was born in the 90s, and there's a little bit of a difference in the way we view the world, the expectations that we have. What is normal is quite different. My father, who was born in the 40s, telling him about a selfie is like telling him about some frivolous activity in the world. Like, he doesn't understand why you need to have so many pictures of yourself. So if you go down the generations of one family, you'll find that each of us has a different idea of what normal is. And we keep stressing, trying to figure out, well, what is the adequate way of living life? And I suppose the quote that I started with at the beginning is that it's very easy to lose what it means to be a self. And what does it mean to be a self? In Kierkegaard's mind, being a self is understanding that you have polarities. You have sort of opposites. Let me read this for you. The self is a synthesis in which the finite is the limiting factor and the infinite is the expanding factor. That's from The Sickness Unto Death. The infinite corresponds to possibility, to the capacity to envisage new thoughts, ideas, and bring into existence new creations, to change oneself, to become something. Those are the things that they told you when you're in school. What do you want to be? You have the potential to be a great singer, to be an artist, to be a carpenter, to be a lawyer, to be a doctor. You have all these options in front of you, and that's sort of infinity. That's what you choose in order to become whatever it is that you need to be. You need to make a choice according to all the things that are before you. The limiting factor, which is the finite, is the things that don't allow you to sort of embrace everything all at once. The finite corresponds to actuality, to necessity. The fact that you have to eat, the fact that you have to pay rent, the fact that you have to, you only have a certain amount of time in this world. So in bearing those two things, there is a compulsion to either immerse yourself completely in the finite or immerse yourself completely in the infinite. And at the heart of the existential problem is anxiety. And anxiety is the dizziness of freedom. I don't think it's any coincidence that in the 2000s, more than any other time in history, anxiety is a big problem. And at least I faced a lot of anxiety, and to me it feels like there's so many things that could happen. There's so many options that I have in front of me, and there's an overwhelming sense of dread, especially when the decisions are quite big, about what choice I'm going to make. Because every choice I make, I am creating my life. I am creating who I'm going to be. If I choose to take a certain job, if I choose to get married or not get married, if I choose to be kind to someone, if I choose to distrust someone, every single moment I'm more and more aware of the choices that I'm making. And I think the problem is the increase in knowledge, the increase in awareness that's coming through it's crippling. And that anxiety is something that I have often tried to run away from. And I think we often try to run away from it with distractions. And Lord knows there are more than enough distractions in this world. My phone, for instance, I spend so much time on that. And usually that's a sign to me that I'm running away from a certain decision I have to make or a certain feeling. And I'll give you this example close to home. There's a relative of mine who's a really hard worker. He sort of got lost in the finite. And by the finite, in the things that are necessary. He is a quantity surveyor. He put a lot of his effort into becoming that, and he defines himself by that work. And by choosing to be a quantity surveyor, he lives by the rules of that profession. He assumes all the things that is supposed to be. And when he recently lost his job, he described a feeling of emptiness, a feeling of loss. Now, I thought back to what Kierkegaard would say about that and what the existential mindset is. And the idea is that feeling of loss, that emptiness was there all along. It's just that there was a distraction. Now, it might sound trivial to call someone's vocation a distraction, but it's only a distraction if your relationship to it is such that you're so bound to it that you use it as a means for you not to realize that you're a self, that you're the one making that choice. It's not just a necessary thing that you have to do. It's not just a duty. It's something that you have to select and say, this is the mode of life that I want to live in. Let me quote something else here. To lose oneself in the infinite is to live as though life is nothing but a series of endless experiments. Different paths are sampled and personalities tried on for size, but no enduring choice or commitment is ever made. One who's lost in the infinite is obsessed with who one can potentially become, yet in reality, he never becomes anything, let alone a self. Now, if possibility outruns necessity, the self runs away from itself. The self becomes an abstract possibility which tires itself out with floundering in the possible, but does not budge from the spot, not to get to any spot, for precisely the necessary is the spot. To become oneself is precisely a movement at the spot. Now that's a lot of jargon, but basically, the idea is that I think most of us, when we're quite young, we relish the fact that we have so much potential, we have so much opportunity. And I know, at least for me, I like to hold on to that because you're not yet a disappointment. You've not yet failed. There's always the best is yet to come. There's something in front of you. But still, you have to choose. And at the time when Kierkegaard was writing, it was at a time when, at least in the 19th century, a lot of the thought was about mass movements. It was about the fact that you could have it all, that you could be both a man of law and a person of leisure, that you could work on the farm and you could work in the office. An ambition I think that all of us kind of seem to have. And here comes this Danish guy saying that, well, you have to make a choice. Even though you have multiple sort of paths that you might be able to take, and maybe you could try and ride them all at the same time, eventually you have to choose. And in that choice, you are creating yourself, as opposed to staying in the possible. Everyone knows someone who, says they're going to start that business, who says they're going to start that podcast, who says they're going to, try something new. And on the first day, they tell you that, well, they're going to, start that art gallery, or, they're going to finally start working out. It sounds great because it's possible, and it's a pleasant distraction. But then a few weeks go by. They've only bought the gear, but they're not doing the workouts. They're not really engaging with that choice. They're merely staying in the realm of the possible. And I bring that back to talk about, this relative of mine, because he despises that mode of living. He says that that's someone who's actually lost, someone who is always daydreaming, who's always looking at what is possible and not what is necessary. And they can wish away their lives. They can sort of mentally put themselves in a place of possibility, but never get to a place of necessity in their lives. And because of that, I think he's been blinded to the fact that he is just as equally lost in the necessary. He never imagined beyond his role as a quantity surveyor that he could become something more. He is now at a place where he's lost that, and therefore he's lost his identity. But if you have an identity that can be so easily lost and stripped away, the idea is that, are you a real self? Are you not abandoning the responsibility you have of becoming who you're supposed to be? The weight of this task definitely elicits anxiety. If you're asking someone that every choice that they make is what is going to create who they are, you're putting a tremendous burden on them. And like the saying goes, anxiety is the dizziness of freedom. And there's this great piece of writing in the concept of anxiety that Kierkegaard writes on, about how when you look, it's like staring down at an abyss, and that dizziness that you feel, it's not just because of the abyss, it's in your eyes, it's in the possibility that you see. And at some point, anxiety becomes dread, and dread is when you have two things that shouldn't be together coming together. You have, I guess, the sweet promise of options in front of you, but you also have the terror of making a mistake, and both those things are, weighing in on you. And the idea is, instead of running away from it, just like my cousin did by, binding himself to, the right way of living according to the dictates of his society, living according to, if I become a quantity surveyor, if I get married to this woman, if I, pursue a certain form of life, I am becoming a self. And, you have that one mode versus the other person who says, well, I'm just going to keep my options open forever and ever. I'm just going to keep myself, in the infinite. Those two things are ways in which you abandon becoming a true self, because a true self is a synthesis of both your finite necessity and your infinite possibility. Now, I think for me, if I'm to bring it back home, one of the ways in which this really came home for me was at the time when I was losing my faith. I reached a point where I realized that I had only a certain vision of life, and I had thrown myself into the Bible, into church, and it gave a lot of promise. I mean, there was a lot of joy there. There was a lot of community. There was a lot of, I guess, purpose. But eventually, when I just couldn't hold on to that belief anymore, given new information that I received, I was now in a place where I went back to possibility, and there was a much bigger weight, because it's much easier when God is telling you that this is the way you're supposed to go. But if it's just you can make a mistake, and making that choice is terrible. But the one thing I've learned is, in making choices, the closer I feel to dread, the closer I feel that anxiety, the better it is for me in the end, because I'm coming closer to becoming a true self. At the top of this, I quoted, the piece about the biggest danger is that of losing oneself. Now, losing oneself sounds silly, but the best way I can describe it is in failing to make the decisions that you believe are going to be the best for you, in actually choosing, in denying the fact that you have all these possibilities in front of you, and limiting yourself to just what you think is rational, just what you think you can do, and sort of dispelling the fact that you create yourself by making choices. You can also lose yourself by simply looking at all those choices and never making a choice, never making something necessary, and never making anything concrete. Our lives don't last forever, and part of the reason I have this bad boy on this desk is every time I have to make a decision on this desk, I realize that I am making myself. I am making what this company is going to become. And I would rather fail in becoming a self than succeed in never having to make a choice. As much as that distraction might be sweet, as much as that distraction, keeps me moving from one day to another, the feeling of dread is important in becoming a self. And in the exploration of Kierkegaard's work, in the next 2 episodes, we're going to be looking at some of the modes, some of the concepts in which people utilize to become selves. And as you listen along, as you watch this, I'd really like to hear back from you if you think this has any resonance with who you are and what your feeling of dread and anxiety has been like. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow for a little bit more existential dread, because it's good for you. All right. Cheers. See you in the next one.